Welcome to Extracurricular. I'm your co-host, Eddie Geller.
And I'm your other co-host, Stephanie Vanos. Am I a school board member for Orange County Public School District 6? Yes, I am, but I'm here unofficially, as I always am.
Wonderful. I just loved it. I loved it. Every time you surprise just a little bit, and it's beautiful. So thank you.
It's my pleasure, Eddie. It's my pleasure.
You're just down to business. It is. You're a busy woman in May, and I'm getting that vibe from you right now.
TikTok. Tell the people what they need to do.
Let's get in, get out. Sorry, we're coming to you a day late, but we had a wonderful guest we'll get to in a moment. We wanted to make sure we talked to our guest today, Genesis Robison. We'll go into that in a moment. So we recorded on Monday to release this on Tuesday. But if you are not subscribed to this podcast, welcome to the podcast, Extracurricular. Once we were called TBD, but now it is Extracurricular. Please do subscribe. Rate us. Steph, what can they rate us?
5 stars only.
5 stars only. And you can also follow us on Instagram at extracurricular_podcast. And you can email us at podcastextracurricular@gmail.com. I know that goes the opposite way than it should, but you know what? That's life. And things don't work out the way you want, but you power through.
Eddie, tell us about Genesis Robison.
Do you want AI just to generate this?
Absolutely not. No, do I want AI? No, I do not.
All right, we had really an incredible guest today, Genesis Robison. He's the executive director of Equal Ground Education Fund and Action Fund, Florida's preeminent Black-led voting rights organization. Genesis was so gracious to give us some of his time to talk about what has happened in Florida with redistricting and what's happened nationally with I know we keep using the same phrase, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. And this conversation I thought was so informative. And I kid you not, I teared up at a portion of it because what is going on right now is heartbreaking. But this conversation I thought was just so important, and Genesis was Equal Ground is doing such great work, and Genesis was just great at communicating what is going on and where we need to go next.
I loved that he, not only explained everything, but also gave us great hope because there are plans. Like, they are making moves, they are responding, and I left feeling like, okay, we're gonna do something about this. We're not just gonna accept it. And Equal Ground is doing such a great job leading the way. I feel like he ended on a hopeful note.
I think so too, and I think if you listen to this, you're gonna feel that as well. This is not all doom and gloom, but there is. I mean, it is 2026. There is doom and there is gloom. So I'm not gonna pretend there's not some of that, but I agree. There's hopefulness. Did you feel like you were speaking to a compatriot who is also suing the state of Florida? Did you feel some kinship?
A little bit, especially when especially we had a conversation about that, because I think there are some people who are saying, why are you suing right now? It's not the right time, the courts, blah, blah, blah. But I think both of us have a belief that, the courts will do what they're designed to do, especially when the Constitution speaks so clearly to something. We'll see if that's the case, but you have to believe and you have to fight. And I appreciated that.
I did too. People say a lot of things about lawyers, and there's plenty of lawyer jokes, but, since I am a partner with a lawyer, like I'm a fan of you guys. I like what you guys do. I mean, not all the time, but you're out there, you're fighting for things. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
It's May. You are busy. I have it in the outline. Busy AF this month. Why is May so busy? Enlighten the listeners.
There's a lot happening right now. Just generally, May is a busy time because it's the end of school year. Mm-hmm. So there's a ton of events, a ton of recognitions, ton of awards. We do a lot of graduations. So that's happening. We're also having conversations about the budget because we have a July 1st kind of new budget start date. So we're talking about the budget. We're talking about the $1 million that will be on the ballot again in a couple of months. Of course, the principal or the superintendent has made non-reappointments of administrative leaders. So there's just a lot of transition happening right now. And there's a lot of emails, a lot of emails. So it's just busy. Not to mention, just personally, I have a daughter who's graduating high school and I have a daughter who is graduating middle school and I have a daughter in between those two. Aww. So just for my own kids, it's a busy, special time.
Well, it's funny you mentioned your daughters. We actually don't usually do this, but we can preview next week's episode, Memorial Day. we have an interview with your eldest daughter, Elizabeth Banos. Are you excited for that episode to come out?
I am. She's amazing.
She's amazing. We'll talk more about that next week when we release that podcast.
You are also busy. You are headed out of town this week.
I don't usually travel very much for work, but I have a work retreat. We're going to Kansas City. Do not ask me which state we are going to. I do not know, but I'm flying into MCI. That may be in Kansas. Listeners, you can let us know. Podcast Extracurricular.
I don't think it's in Kansas, just for the record.
Well, there's Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri. Anyway, what does it matter? I mean, it does matter that I get to the right place, but I'm very excited for this work retreat. So I work at a remote organization. We have about 170 people, and I have met, I kid you not, less than half a dozen of my coworkers in real life, like just on various trips to California and someone who came here to visit Orlando. So I'm about to meet a whole host of people in person that I've never met. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm also, during the retreat, I'm running a little workshop on improv for public speaking. So I'm very excited to lead people in some goofy improv exercises and warm-ups and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to it. It should be a lot of fun.
Well, I saw your notes for the event that you're, or the, I guess the workshop that you're running, and it looks really good. So it almost makes me want to, take improv for public speaking, but I'm not going to, but it almost makes me want to.
Well, you're a great public speaker, so I don't think you need it that much, but you would have a lot of fun, and you should consider taking some improv classes.
Okay, moving on.
By the way, I just asked you to print those. You read my notes?
I mean, I skimmed them. They looked good.
Wow. Where's the privacy? Where is the privacy? Okay, I am kidding, of course. We had a wonderful weekend. We went to a wedding. This is our second wedding together. How did you like it?
It was fun.
Yeah.
It was very fun. I think it was a fun wedding. Ended up knowing quite a few people there, and it was a local wedding. Mm-hmm. And our photographer for Orange County Public Schools, who is at all of our board meetings and events, I didn't know this, but he had been hired to do the wedding. And so I got to hang out with Frank a bit this Saturday night, which was fun.
Frank was great. Frank's a real goofball. If you've ever been to an Orange County Public School meeting, you would recognize him immediately. And shouts to Orange County Public School board meetings. You should go if you're interested in participating in our democracy and our school boards. But Frank, what a charmer, great photographer, first of all, does his work very well, but also just a fun guy to be around. He's got a lot of bits. I love someone who's got a lot of bits. And Frank is just like going with the jokes. And he was fun to have at the wedding.
He was great. He was super fun. And he made me get a picture holding a drink in my hand because he said, it's okay. It's okay to have a drink in your hand and take a picture. So I said, okay. So we did one together. It was fun. I think one of the there were a few highlights. We sat next to a couple wonderful couples. And of course, the marriage in itself was lovely. But they were passing out cake towards the end. And there was it was vanilla cake, but there were also some strawberry segments of it. You wanted a strawberry segment, not in a diva way, but you were like, if there's a choice, I'd take the strawberry. And so the guy passed you just the regular vanilla. And I went, hey, sir, if you have a strawberry, can you please get her one? He's like, I think we might be out, but I'll go look. And then 3 minutes later, he comes back to the table with a semi-strawberry slice, not like the full, didn't have the full, I think, strawberry filling. But the excitement on his face, getting you that strawberry slice of cake, I think was part of what made my night. He was so excited to get you that cake. He was so excited. And I was so appreciated. So appreciated. I will say, as we walked out later, we did see a whole tray of strawberry cake slices, but whatever. It was, maybe they were hidden in the kitchen. Who knows? Whatever. It was a delicious cake, and it was a fun wedding for all. So I'm really happy to be there. It was great. Strawberry cake, no strawberry milk, but that's okay. That might have been a little too much strawberry. Okay, last thing. This coming week, I and a few of my friends who most of us used to do improv together, though not all of us, during COVID started doing a movie club. Then they kind of post-COVID were like, all right, we don't want to spend, and we would meet every week and watch a movie and discuss it. And then post-COVID, they kind of fell apart. But a few of us have moved away, and so now we're getting the crew back together for our first movie club in 3 years. And we were watching the movie Sentimental Value. And Steph, you're gonna come join us. I am. You invited me. I did. Think, and I appreciate that. But also, I'm a little intimidated because, so I've never been part of a movie club before.
Okay.
I mean, I just like movies. I just like to enjoy them. I don't want to think too much, right? That's like my break time. And I feel like I love your friends.
Okay.
And I've met them. I've met most of them and hung out for a good long weekend.
Sure.
So super nice, super smart.
Yeah.
But I mean, whenever you're doing a movie club with people who call movies films, I feel like that's like a little intimidating. So I'm just someone who calls movies movies.
That's okay. We take all comers to it's called the Chris Alvarado Movie Club because one of the members of the movie club is named Chris Alvarado, and we just decided to call the movie club after him. But we're excited to discuss a movie. You're going to do fantastic. Just so you know, in case you out there want to start your own movie club, how we do it is, well, we used to go every week, someone pick a new movie with a theme. I think we're going to try and at least do it monthly. And then we rate the movie 1 to 5, including decimal points. And I have the reputation of being the biggest hater and we keep scores. We have a spreadsheet of the scores, and I have the lowest average of scores. So I'm the true hater in the group, but that's okay. I have high standards for movies, for film, for cinema.
Well, so far sentimental value is pretty good.
You are 1/3 of the way through it.
Less than 1/3.
Less than 1/3, but you will finish by the time movie clubs happens.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, and we're gonna have a great discussion on it. But speaking of more immediate great discussions, I'm excited for y'all to listen to our interview with Genesis Robison of Equal Ground. So enjoy. Genesis Robison, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Excited to be with you.
Oh, we're excited to have you. As we were saying before we get started, wish this could be under better circumstances, but we're grateful for your expertise in the work Equal Ground is doing to fight for voting rights. So let's just start with just a bit of a basic introduction. What kind of work does Equal Ground do, and how did you personally get into this work?
Yeah, sure thing. So Equal Ground is a Black-led voting rights organization. We've been in existence now for 7 years. We were founded by Jasmine Burney Clark, and she had the mission to create an organization that is solely centered on increasing civic engagement within the Black community in the state of Florida. We do voter education work, we do voter preparedness, strategic planning, leadership development, and a whole cadre of things aimed at really expanding political power and getting our community more involved in the civic process. I came to this work after having spent time working in the United States Congress, as well as in the Florida legislature. They asked me to help kind of expand out their presence and their footprint in Volusia County, where I live. And quickly, it was sort of determined that I could use some of my other talents to help the organization. And so they created a position of political director to expand out our footprint in advocacy. And then in 2024, our founder, Jasmine, was given the opportunity to be the state director for the Biden-Harris campaign, then Harris-Walz campaign, where she asked me to come in and lead the organization. And I've been leading the organization ever since.
I love it. What do you think took more years off your life, working in Congress or the Florida legislature?
Oh, that's a very tough question. Probably the hardest to get all conversation. I would probably say working in the Florida legislature, though, if I had to say. When I was in D.C., I was there on the tail end of the Obama presidency. And so although, they had lost Congress for a portion of that time, there was at least still the stopgap of the presidency, right? Where you knew that there had to be a somewhat compromise coming from the Congress with the executive branch. Whereas when I got back to Florida, it was just smooth sailing, and the wheels were sort of greased for Republicans, right? Republican legislature, Republican governor, as well as the Supreme Court. And so that was really like a culture shock to me.
Yeah.
Just seeing, one party be able to dominate the policy discussion and get whatever they wanted out of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked a bit about that and just how, everything seems to sort of be falling in place. And how do you fight that? I mean, what is the strategy, do you think, to kind of break into a state control where really all three branches are sort of acting in concert with each other, or seemingly acting in concert with each other?
No, I think you had it right the first time. There's no seemingly about it. That is the reality of what we're facing. Unfortunately, we're a nonpartisan organization at Equal Ground. We do have a C4 as well. So we're both C3 and C4. Equal Ground Education Fund is our C3. Equal Ground Action Fund is our C4. I'd say the primary bulk of what we do on the C3 side is just education. I think it's so critical to get folks to understand the inner workings of our government and sort of how that dynamic impacts their life. We are presently on a statewide tour. We do this at the end of legislative session every year. And there's one of the slides in the presentation that shows a graphic of what a supermajority means. And when we're able to show that graphic, and it's like 120 dots that represents the House, and over 2/3 of them are painted red, folks really understand the power dynamic. And so when you see, bills like House Bill 991, which is for documentary proof of citizenship, or domestic terrorism designation, and you don't see bills that help with affordability, bills that help expand access to good quality health care, bills that expand quality education, it really gets you to understand what one party control leads to. It's a complete domination of the conversation, a domination of the priorities around policy. And regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, that good policy tends to come from, give and take, right? Each side has to concede something. And generally, when no side is happy, that's when you have the best policy. And so I think kind of impressing that upon folks around the education component and sort of what that means to their daily lives is, something that we work on every day. But I think that's the first step to trying to break that cycle.
I love that and so appreciate that. And I just want to say good policy also comes as solutions to problems that actually exist versus problems that don't actually exist.
Yes, absolutely.
So I want to set the stage because I want to talk, a lot has been happening here in Florida and of course nationally, but if you don't mind, Genesis, could you just set the stage, even in just the last month, where are we at either in Florida or in this country? I'm trying to paint a picture for listeners to really what has taken place, where we are in voting rights in this country, what essentially is kind of going on or what's happened in this last month. And I know it's gone on for years, but
Absolutely.
Just setting the table for how folks should understand this.
Yeah, well, I don't even know where to start. There's so many
right.
Unfortunately, around the democratic process and folks having access not only to the ballot, but to solid representation. But here recently in Florida, we just saw at the end of April, the state legislature and the governor really work in concert to pass a redistricting plan that would give Republicans an opportunity to have more of a share of Florida's congressional delegation. Redistricting is a process that typically happens every 10 years after the census. Many of your listeners, I'm sure, know that during the census, we count up all the people in a particular location, and then we, draw lines for political representation to determine, what those boundaries would be. Well, last year, Donald Trump started to, kind of read the tea leaves and projected that, his party would struggle in the midterm election. And so he called on states, conservative states in particular, to take up redistricting mid-decade and draw lines in such a way that they would potentially create more Republican seats in the hopes that his party would be able to hold on to power in the midterm elections. And unfortunately, our governor, Ron DeSantis, agreed to take on that challenge. And so what we've seen is a mid-decade redistricting push that is now giving them an advantage. They passed a map that is projected to create 24 out of 28 congressional seats in favor of Republicans, shifting from what was the previous map that was 20 seats for Republicans and 8 for Democrats. And going back even further, 5 years prior to that, it was 14 to 13. So in just 5 years, we've seen a shift in which there was great parity in the process of 14 to 13 to now a map that is designed to produce for Republicans to the tune of 24 to 4. And, this is problematic for a whole host of reasons, but one of the things that I think people need to understand is that redistricting is more than just lines on a map. How districts are drawn really determine whether or not a community can elect people to go and champion the issues that make their lives better, right? From healthcare, education, housing, criminal justice, affordability. And when the deck is stacked, when they, carve out and select voters based on their political status and how they think those voters will perform, it doesn't give communities a fair chance. And so that is something that I think everybody should want, is an opportunity to have a fair share and a fair opportunity to elect people who will fight for your communities. But more importantly, here in the state of Florida, we have something known as the Fair District Amendments. And the Fair District Amendments were safeguards put in place by Florida voters in 2010, which are very simple amendments to the Constitution. They say that we want our redistricting process to be done in a way that does not give preference or favor to incumbents. It does not give preference to political parties for partisan reasons. We want the maps to not diminish the voting power of minority communities. And we want, best of our ability, our districts to be drawn compact, right? So that Miami and Tallahassee don't end up in the same congressional district. And they're very simple, right? But unfortunately, when you have greedy politicians who want to control power and who want to control outcomes, they ignore the will of the voters. And that is what we have seen in Florida with the passage of this map. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about like some of the fallout from that. But in essence, that is what we're seeing happening here in Florida around the redistricting front. And then obviously there are some things around other policies that passed this election, this legislative cycle that I hope we'll get a chance to talk about as well.
Definitely.
So when our legislature and our governor take actions like this that are so blatantly unconstitutional, what remedy do we have? What can we do about that?
Well, that's a great question. So we are taking action in our own hands at Equal Ground. We were one of the first organizations to file litigation and a lawsuit against the state of Florida because we believe that they have clearly violated the Constitution. The Fair District Amendments are very clear, and they did the exact opposite of what they say. They have created more of an advantage for the Republican Party, and so we have asked, state court to intervene. We've asked for a preliminary injunction. We just had a hearing on Friday where the circuit judge heard oral arguments from both sides and is presently in deliberation. But we hope that they render a decision that says, hey, the state clearly violated the Constitution. Therefore, we're going to stop this map from being enacted. But ultimately, we don't want it to just be stopped for one election cycle. We want it to be abandoned altogether.
And just to pull the string a little bit on that, so just so people understand, so when you say preliminary injunction, what you have asked the judge is to basically say these new maps cannot be enforced for this upcoming election cycle, and then the case in full will be decided as well as an additional piece, right?
That is correct. So the injunction would prevent the elections that we have coming up in just a few months from having to, undergo under these new maps. That would make the life of our supervisors of elections easier. That would make the lives of Florida voters, right, who would potentially have their districts changed, their representatives changed, their congressmen or women changed. And so, yeah, we're asking the court to step in, stop this map from being enacted, and then allowing the case to play out, allowing our attorneys to make their case, and then ultimately ruling that other map that was just recently passed is unconstitutional and stopping it from ever being enacted.
I'm curious, obviously, so appreciate the technical explanation of what is happening, and it is so egregious. I mean, how does it feel on a day-to-day basis fighting these fights and watching this happen in our own state? I mean, I'm sure, you're personal stake in this, as a voter, as a black man, it has to be maddening. And I'm just curious, like, how you feel about it as you go on this fight.
Yeah, it is. It is very disheartening to see, as a voting rights organization, first and foremost, our goal is to always provide the most access that we can for people to participate in our democracy. And that's not only through their vote, but through their representation, right? To be able to see themselves reflected in the process. At the core of the American experiment of democracy is the belief that the people have the right to govern themselves, right? And we do that obviously through our vote. And when you do things to take people further away from the process, to ensure that they don't have access or they don't have representation, is really a slap in the face to democracy. And so, I think first and foremost, it doesn't allow us to be our true selves, or at least what we profess to be on a good day as Americans. And so that's very disheartening. But then two, to take it a step further with what we're seeing at the national level, recently the Callais decision was rendered down by the Supreme Court of the United States. And for those of you who may not be familiar, Callais was basically a case that originated out of Louisiana, where non-black voters sued the state because they had created a black access district to give those voters a chance to be represented in the congressional delegation. It was a long case, heard over a number of years, and finally the case rendered a decision that prevented that district from going into effect. But the problem is, with that decision came the gutting of what was the crowning achievement of the civil rights movement, and that is the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act has long been a safeguard to ensure that persons of color, particularly black people, have an opportunity to participate in our democracy. We've seen this impact, we've felt this impact. Obviously, those who wish to exclude and only allow a certain type of person to participate in our democracy have long opposed the Voting Rights Act. And just here recently, this decision that was rendered by the court may be the final death blow to what was just a seminal achievement of the movement. And so to see, obviously it was prior to my lifetime that the Voting Rights Act was enacted, but I know people, my mother, my grandmother, they saw the advancements of our democracy, and yet in their lives still have now seen the destruction of it in ways that is just untold and unimaginable.
Starkly put, and thank you for articulating that. I mean, I've on this podcast, Steph and I both attempted to grasp for the words for what this means, and I appreciate you putting a finer point on it, because it just, there's no way I could understand it, but it just feels so monumental and heartbreaking. Doesn't even begin to cover it. And it's not about heartbreak. It's about participation and the ability that we are all supposed to have to be able to elect representatives that represent us, and to watch it be gutted again and taken away, and specifically from black and minority communities. I this is the thing that I read about in history books, and we're so proud of the past and the folks who fought for this, and to watch it be peeled back it just feels incredibly unreal. I want to go back to Callais in a moment, but you brought up a great point, and we can talk again, because what happens in Florida happens nationally and vice versa. You mentioned some of what was passed this last session in terms of curtailing voting rights and access to the ballot here in Florida. Can you talk about some of what has been passed here in Florida that, again, attacks people's rights to have access to the ballot that's separate from redistricting?
Yeah, sure thing. So, Florida has unfortunately become the epicenter of all attacks on democracy. For, about 4 to 5 years in a row, we've seen attempts to make it harder to administer elections in our state, to make it harder for people to access the ballot box. And this year was no different. There was a bill, House Bill 991. This was filed by Representative Persons Maluka. And simply put, this bill would require proof of citizenship in order to be eligible to vote. Many of your listeners may have heard of the SAVE Act at the federal level. This is very similar to the SAVE Act. It's actually been dubbed Florida's version of the SAVE Act. But to me and to many of my colleagues who do this work, we believe that this is, a step further than the SAVE Act at the federal level, because not only does it require proof of citizenship, but it also eliminates certain forms of identification that people could use in order to be eligible to vote. Forms of identification that have long been used, for like our students, for our retirees, right? Identification that they've been able to go and cast their vote with is no longer acceptable. And so that's a problem. I'll say first and foremost, right, many of my colleagues and the folks that do this work day in and day out around democracy, we want safe and fair elections, right? We want our election system to have integrity. However, a lot of the solutions that we see coming from Tallahassee are really solutions to problems that don't exist, right? Yes, we want only registered individuals to be able to cast votes. Yes, we want only eligible people to be able to cast votes. But the bill that now requires proof of citizenship runs the risk of disenfranchising people, all in the name of trying to solve a problem that they claim exists. Yet, if you survey the 67 supervisors of elections in this state, you wouldn't find one that tells you that non-citizen voting is rampant, right? Like that's just not a problem that's happening. We already have laws on the book. We already have a system in place to ensure that only American citizens are able to cast their votes, and that is happening. The system is working the way that it's supposed to. But when you now go back in and you say, well, let's add this extra layer of proof, you run the risk of disenfranchising people who may not have the documents needed in order to cast a vote. And so what the way this would work in practice is starting in 2027, and I want to say that because that's an important piece. There's some misinformation about that being in place now. Our colleagues fought really hard. Shout out to Common Cause, my good friend Amy Key. Shout out to SPLC, Jonathan Weber, Brad, all voting as local. I probably shouldn't have gotten into names.
It's all right.
It's always a mistake.
We love a shout out though.
But shout out to those folks who were in Tallahassee holding it down, and they fought really hard to ensure that the implementation of House Bill 991 doesn't go into effect until next year. And so that's very important, because as we were trying to make the case for how much of a boogeyman this was and that it was going into effect this year, a lot of people still believe that it's going into effect this year, but it's not. But anyway, go back to the bill. Simply put, they're going to run your name through different databases. If they can confirm that you are a citizen, fine, nothing will change about the way that you vote. Everything will check out. But if for any reason they can't verify your citizenship status, they'll send you documentation, or they'll, the statute says that they are required to notify you. We're not sure what that notice looks like yet, so that's a big sticking point, right? Is it a phone call? Is it a text message? Is it putting something in the newspaper that nobody reads? So they have to notify you, and then you would have to provide proof of citizenship. In the most immediate ways that we know that to be, that would look like a birth certificate or passport. Now, if I asked your listeners to go and put their hands on their birth certificate, not many people would be able to go and do that. If I said, go get your passport, some may not even have a passport, right? And we recognize the barrier that becomes to being able to do your civic duty and participate in our democracy. My grandmother, she was born in 1940. In fact, she just had a birthday 6 days ago where she turned 86 years old. She was not born at a hospital. She was born in rural Georgia to a midwife who wrote the particulars of her birth in the back of the family Bible. And so for my grandmother, there's no such thing as a birth certificate, right? But she exists. She's been voting. She's been participating in her community. She's been paying taxes. And yet, for some reason, if her name were to be flagged as someone who doesn't come up as a citizen, right, then she would be scrambling all in an effort to protect something that she's done her whole life. And so, yes, House Bill 991, it is a very terrible voter suppression bill, and it will have an impact on hundreds of thousands of people in this state, not to mention the cost of getting a passport, right? So then that becomes a poll tax when you have a financial commitment standing in the way from people on the ballot box. So very terrible bill. I'm happy that we had a chance to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Sorry, Steph.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, you talking about the cost. Well, I went to our supervisor of elections had an event earlier this week. So I was listening to her, and there's also a cost to the supervisor of elections office to now suddenly have to chase all of these people who have been registered voters in the past and now have to try to track down, each and every person that you said has a legal right to vote, has been voting. That adds cost to them. That adds distraction from them. And if anything, that's taking their time away from other ways they could be ensuring that we're having safe and secure elections. So, there's that piece of it. And the other thing she mentioned was, that as she goes to these conferences with other supervisors of elections in the state of Florida, most of whom, by the way, are Republicans. She's like, it's a great group of people. I feel very confident in the, safety and security of our elections. And so again, just to highlight the point that you made earlier, this really isn't a problem that needs additional legislation to address. And it's just going to cost more money, disenfranchise more people for the benefit of a few. So.
Also, since you brought that up, not to mention, and this is a little bit of an aside from where we're going, the danger this puts, that continually questioning our election system and saying the president saying things like rigged and all this stuff and the big lie puts these folks in danger. These hardworking public servants who just want to run elections, that they are attacked, and they have many of them to leave their positions just for trying to run safe and fair elections. So the effects of all of this are all so pernicious, and they cascade in a lot of unexpected and terrible ways. Well, all right. So let's move back out nationally. You mentioned Callais. You talked through it. What do you think this means for the future? This is a big question, but the future of the Voting Rights Act. Like, where do we need to go from here? And I'm just curious what you kind of think of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hate to admit it, but the Voting Rights Act as we know it, or as we knew it, it's done. I mean, there's no more coming back from that. Section 2 has been gutted. Section 5 has been gutted. And I mean, obviously it still exists, but the threshold in which courts and attorneys have been able to use to make the case that there's been violations has just been so severely gutted that it's going to be really hard to come back from. So what we need to do is, start anew. There is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that is sitting in Congress, obviously because of the makeup of Congress right now, and obviously the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We know that that's going to be a tall order to happen at least before 2028. But just as we have a chance coming up here in November in the midterm elections to kind of start making some progress in the Congress, and then hopefully we can continue that progress in 2028 by electing someone who believes in democracy, someone who doesn't deny elections, someone who doesn't sick their mob onto the Capitol and seeks to, incite an insurrection. Hopefully we can build on that to allow the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to become the law of the land. But I would say in addition to that, we have to continue to make the case that access to our democracy should not be partisan. Somewhere or the other, we got into this notion that allowing people to do their civic duty and the most patriotic American thing that one could do is somehow partisan, right? And it's not. And it is the people who fear engagement. It is the people who fear that their policies and the things that they do don't resonate with the American people have tried to somehow hijack our system to their own benefit. And so I think, really sounding the alarm on that is something that we have to do, but also take on state versions of the VRA. Florida was the first state in the South. I'm very proud of that, to introduce its own version of the Voting Rights Act. We've seen now for years where the VRA has been under attack, and we knew that this day would eventually come. And so, you've seen states adopt their own version of the Voting Rights Act to be a safeguard and protections. And so we have that here in the state of Florida. It was the brainchild of the late Senator Geraldine Thompson, who believed deeply in access to democracy. And prior to her death, worked with us, she's now Senator LaVon Bracey Davis, and now Representative Young, to introduce the state version of the Florida VRA, which is named after Harry T. and Harriet Moore, who were trailblazers in the civil rights space, who were responsible for the creation of the NAACP here in Florida, the largest expansion of Black civic participation, and who was murdered, unfortunately, on Christmas Day in 1951 when a racist placed a bomb underneath their home, and both Mr. and Mrs. Moore died as a consequence of that. And so, we're honored to carry forth legislation that bears their name, to try and push forward to pro-democracy, advances in our democracy, things like making voter registration day a holiday, making vote by mail requests permanent, expanding language access, making it harder for communities to dilute minority votes, creating a statewide database for returning citizens, because we saw what happened after we passed Amendment 4 in 2018, where they came back and redefined what it meant to complete a sentence. So, I think passing state level VRAs is really the immediate thing that states can do to counteract that terrible decision that we saw by the United States Supreme Court.
And thank you for sharing that. It does give us hope to know that there are ways around. And I actually do have a follow-up question on the lawsuit. But just sticking with the Voting Rights Amendment, as I read it, one question that I had was, is sort of that intent piece of it. So when I read the amendment, it looks as though, as long as you can't prove, that the result of the map could be to favor a political party, as long as you don't prove that there was intent, right, to favor the political party. And that's difficult. I mean, proving intent of someone creating a map is a very high standard. And I think that is also an issue in the Callais opinion, if I'm not mistaken. So can you just speak a little bit to that, the difference between having to prove intent versus having to just show like the result of an action?
Yeah, well, it's actually, I think they said as long as you don't, like you can openly do something to the benefit of a political party. Okay. And if by doing that, you disproportionately harm or reduce the ability of Black voters to have access to the ballot box or elect candidates of their choice, that's okay, just as long as you were doing it for the purposes of trying to advance a political party. And so it's just a terrible decision, because we know that is the new answer, right? I mean, it's no coincidence, it's no secret that Black voters tend to typically vote in a block, and that block typically is with the Democratic Party. And so they know that if they can now attack it for partisan reasons, the end result of that is going to be a benefit to Republicans, unfortunately, and a disproportionate impact for Black voters.
Well, one of the most just make sure your head explode statements from the Republican Party on the Callais decision is, finally we've corrected this thing, and we're no longer taking race into account, and and the immediate result is just the destruction of multiple majority minority districts, just getting rid of Black representation. I mean, it's really head spinning to hear. Immediate. I mean, when we see in Florida, in Georgia, in Texas, not in Texas, Texas had already done theirs, but Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, all of the southern states, and many states that only had one representative to begin with. These states act like, they're dealing with a whole congressional delegation of Black, representatives.
This is like, you fought for one. You got the one, and now you're trying to get rid of the one. I mean, it's just shameful. And, to use that as an excuse, like I've always told people, the VRA, any type of law that mandates inclusion has always been the floor to begin with, right? It's never been the ceiling. Like, we can always aspire to include more people. And so, the fact that we got rid of the floor as if it was somehow like doing something, like I said, many of these states only had one to begin with. You look at states like Louisiana and Mississippi that I think have at least a third of their state's population as Black people, and yet you got Black folks fighting for one representative in their congressional delegations. It's shameful, and it just really shows how you can use gerrymandering to pack and crack districts and communities to get the intended outcome that you want. And it's just really shameful. Here in the state of Florida, and the reason that the gutting of the Voting Rights Act hit so hard is here in the state of Florida, it was the Voting Rights Act which allowed Florida to create seats that gave minorities a chance to win in the first place. At the end of Reconstruction, there was a gentleman who had served in Florida's congressional delegation, and I cannot believe that I'm blanking on his name right now because I've said it. Oh, Josiah T. Walls. Josiah T. Walls served in Congress for Florida, and he left Congress at the turn of Reconstruction, and it was over 100 years. 100 years, an entire century before Florida would elect another Black person to Congress. So think the end of the 1800s, all the way until 1992, which is in all of our lifetimes, that we didn't see another Black person elected to represent the state of Florida. And that was because of a legal challenge citing the Voting Rights Act, where the state of Florida was compelled to draw 3 congressional districts to give Black voters in this state a chance to elect a representative of their choosing. And those 3 seats, 2 were in South Florida. One was for the late Congressman Alcee Hastings. The other was for the late Congresswoman Carrie Meek. And then the third one was in North Florida in the Jacksonville area for Congresswoman Corrine Brown. And it was because of a lawsuit citing the Voting Rights Act that those 3 members were able to take their seat in Congress. And then after the Fair District Amendments passed in 2010, the state violated those newly enacted Fair District Amendments, and the Supreme Court forced them to redraw their map. And then we were able to get a 4th seat that would elect an African American. And that's how Congresswoman Val Demings out of Orlando was able to go to Congress. And so we had 4 of Florida's then 27 congressional districts that were created to give minorities a chance to win those seats. And now we only have 2 of those seats. After in 2022, the governor decimated Black political representation with the gerrymander that was done in 2022.
Thank you for that history. It is shameful. I mean, you've said it many times, and you are absolutely right. It is. And one question I do want to follow up on, and you mentioned before the 2010 amendment was passed, it was a lawsuit that enabled the having the representation for 3 Black congressional representatives. And you've spoken that Equal Ground has filed another lawsuit. And I say this as someone myself who has filed a lawsuit against the state of Florida this month. Some people say that they're skeptical about bringing lawsuits right now because of the makeup of the courts. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly understand. We have really just launched into this partisan wave where everything is partisan. Whether you take a mask or don't take a mask, or a vaccine or don't take a vaccine, right? Everything is literally couched in partisan language. And so I definitely understand the fear of that. But we have to continue to hold hope that the courts will do what they were designed to do. In 2022, when we filed a lawsuit against the state then, the case was given to Judge Lee Marsh, who was appointed to the court under Rick Scott. Now, we could have held our heads and said, oh my goodness, we're doomed. But Judge Marsh actually heard the merits of the case and actually ruled in our favor and ruled that map to be unconstitutional. Now, ultimately, it went to the circuit court, to the appellate court, all the way up to the Florida Supreme Court, and they ruled against us. But we got to continue to have faith in these systems that, that the law is so clear, and we believe that the Fair District Amendments are so clear that it doesn't leave a whole lot of room for interpretation. Either you did it for partisan reasons or you didn't. And with rolling out a map on Fox News, taking a victory lap, talking about how you've delivered for your party, doing this after you just got your preferred map 4 years prior in 2022, doing this after Donald Trump has called on states to do it, all the other neighboring states openly saying that they're doing it for partisan reasons because they don't have fair district amendments and they can say that it's for partisan reasons. We're not stupid. There's a saying, I was born at night, but not last night.
I like it. And I appreciate that. I think you're right. I think what's the alternative? That's the other thing. Like, what's the alternative? That we just don't do anything? That we, of course you have to try. So I appreciate your group for bringing that lawsuit.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, to round us out, you've walked us through so much of this and we're so grateful. How can folks who are listening support the work that Equal Ground is doing?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. We're on all the major social media platforms at Equal Ground Florida. We still have a traditional website, equal-ground.com. info@equal-ground.com is our email address. But we're also on tour right now. From now through mid-July, we'll be traveling the state, talking to voters, talking about the impact of Florida's legislative session. Obviously, they're still there doing the work of trying to finalize the budget. But we're traveling the state, talking about legislative session, talking about this redistricting fight, but also talking about how we can build power to fight back and get engaged in the upcoming elections. This is a very critical and consequential election year for our state. We will be electing a new governor. We have a special election for the Senate. Several cabinet positions, obviously all 120 seats in the Florida House are up for election, half of the Florida Senate, tons of local elections. And so we want people to understand that they have agency, they have power, they have an opportunity to do something about the things that they are seeing or the things that they are not seeing, and just connecting people to their own power to do something about it. And so would love to have you join us on one of our tour stops. I don't have all the dates in front of me, but if you visit equal-ground.com or find us on social media, we're constantly talking about it. And the last thing I'll say is we have a newsletter. During legislative session, we put it out every week that has the most pertinent and relevant updates around legislative session. But outside of legislative session, we offer that once a month, the first Monday of every month. And so that's a way to just be connected, get some information that's not as meaty and wordy, but still cuts at the core of what you need to know.
Well, thank you so much for your time and especially for your work. Genesis Robison, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you. Really appreciate you. And we will share some of those dates and information as well so that more people can learn more about what you're doing and how you're trying to save our state and our democracy. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. Thank you.